Hello, everyone. This is Bruce, and welcome to Congress Weekly. This episode will cover the question, what is next for the United States? You have heard plenty about what is going on in and around Afghanistan, and I will cover some of that. My main focus, however, will be not only on what can Congress do, both the House and Senate, along with the President, CIA, and FBI, but what we can most likely expect as far as our safety going forward. So much talk over the summer has been on woke, yet what is going on with that topic could possibly seem like ants we are dealing with once ISIS-K continues to grow. More on ISIS-K in a moment, but for a reference, they are a relatively small terrorist group but quickly growing with many bad actors. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the tragedy of the 13 American soldiers who were just killed, along with many Afghans in Afghanistan. ISIS-K claims responsibility for that terrorist act at the Kabul airport. In addition, there were approximately 2,500 American soldiers over the past 20 years who lost their lives in Afghanistan. Over 20,000 were injured, and 1,720 U.S. civilian contractors were killed. Those who served are really feeling the effects of what is taking place in Afghanistan, and many are seeking help in dealing with it. As of this taping, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg of how all of this will affect not only our service members, everyone who was in country and or who had a play in the action there, including media. Make no mistake about it, the United States has one large problem on its hands. Maybe other countries like Israel and Palestine will as well, but my impression is the biggest problem could face us. You have heard plenty about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and there are many who are saying how it should have been done, but I don't want to focus very much on that. Instead, let me focus on the near and long-term future of our country and a little on the Middle East. To get to that topic, I need to provide some background. Here is a quick rundown of some history to give you an idea of what we are facing and are possibly about to face. It is my fault for not taking advantage of all the tools available to me to show charts while I'm covering some of my information. The software I use does provide it. I'll eventually learn it. My apologies. Let's start with Afghanistan. It is slightly smaller than Texas, but that alone gives you an idea of how large of a country it is. It is north and west of Pakistan, east of Iran, and China is not very far away. All this is not good news. More about Iran a little later. Afghanistan has a population of approximately 37,500,000. Kabul, which is the capital, alone has 4.3 million people. What is sad is life expectancy is around 52 to 53 years for both women and men. In addition, we hear a lot about women not being permitted to be educated. On average, they receive only 8 years of school, and that most likely will get worse. And those figures were during the so-called good years. However, males only receive 10 years of school on average. The president of the country left on August 15th of this year, while the first vice president declared he is now in charge. Most are not agreeing with him, since the Taliban quickly swept through and took over the vast majority of the country. There are actually several terrorist groups within the country. The ones that we hear about the most are the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS-K. The Taliban formed in 1994 as a guerrilla group, and they are also in camps in Pakistan. Once they took control of the majority of Afghanistan the first time, women were required to wear a veil in public, they could not work outside of the home, and were denied access to education, and could only go shopping if accompanied by a male relative. The strictest version of Sharia Islamic law was introduced. I won't go into the gruesome details of what those laws cover. Al-Qaeda, which was led by Osama bin Laden, formed mostly in Pakistan in the late 1990s. Bin Laden provided funding to the Taliban, so that terrorist group could not just write him off. Therefore, the Taliban provided sanctuary for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Bin Laden was the mastermind behind the September 11th attack against our country. Some terrorists recently have said there is no proof of bin Laden being in charge of the attack against us, but we actually do have proof. In order for any terrorist group to survive, they need to receive some type of funding. It is no secret that they receive the majority of their funds from the sale of opium. After 9/11, the United States, along with our allies, tried for the next 20 years to train the Afghans to fight to protect their country. But as we know, they failed. Even as some key figures within terrorist groups are terminated, there is always someone else ready to step into their role. We tend to celebrate the news when someone important is terminated, but that accomplishment is only temporary. That brings us to ISIS-K. The K stands for the Husseini province. They are an offshoot of ISIS, pledge allegiance to al-Baghdadi, who the United States terminated. This group broke away from the Taliban, and the two are not friends. In fact, some think the recent suicide bombing at the Kabul airport was just against the United States. I have read a report stating that it was more against the Taliban. My opinion, they do not like either the Taliban or the United States. They do not mind Al-Qaeda. As you can tell, all of this can get very confusing in a hurry. ISIS-K is constantly plotting attacks against Western targets. They don't just limit their planning to the West, and no location is off limits to them. They kill at mosques, public squares, schools, and even hospitals. They don't think twice about killing women and children. Just recently, the Taliban released thousands of ISIS-K fighters from the U.S. prisons that were in Bagram in Afghanistan. As you might recall, the United States stationed troops at Bagram Air Base, which we controlled, that had 2 runways, tons of equipment, with a lot of it abandoned recently as we left that location. With that background, it brings me back to my initial question. What's next for the United States? Many feel there have been terrorists who were able to obtain passage out of Kabul airport on the planes that were flying people out until August 31st, which is within 24 hours of this taping. This is true, since they have been caught after landing and further vetting took place. Does that mean we have captured all of them? Hardly. And don't hesitate to think that they are already finding other ways to come to our country. Our southern border is a perfect example. So what needs to happen? Our Congress has to work together to ensure our safety. That should become their #1 priority as they return to Washington, D.C. Defunding the police, eliminating ICE, and any other protection resources should be a thing of the past. In fact, we need to build these organizations up. Being in Afghanistan did help in holding back the spread of terrorism in our country. No one really wanted us to be there, but it made sense. As we leave, we are giving a place for terrorists to harbor, operate, plan, and conduct business without much worry. As I mentioned earlier, with Iran and Pakistan and China all within easy reach of Afghanistan, it will only make our lives more dangerous. There is no country surrounding Afghanistan that will permit the United States to establish a foothold so we can be close in proximity. As far as overseas, as I mentioned earlier, we will need to worry about Israel and Palestine. Both are still fighting each other. Iran is a big supporter of Palestine. So time will tell if things begin to get dicey in these locations. And we should never forget about keeping an eye on North Korea. We have thousands of U.S. troops in South Korea, and for good reason. Thank you for watching. Sometimes I feel we live in a dangerous world, but then I realize it mostly is beyond our borders. I am now totally convinced that is no longer the case. We are definitely living in a threatening environment. Until my next video, please be safe.